Hello, welcome to Created to Create Study Series Part 2. Today we'll be going through the study series of Genesis 1 through 2:3. These are is a summary view of the 7 days of creation, 6 days in which God creates the universe and fills the earth, and the 7th day in which he rests. So we'll begin with the statement made that most people are familiar with, Genesis 1:1, and it starts off that God says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovering over the waters." This is interesting. We already get a picture of nothingness, and then God creates. And so this Hebrew word, God in this case, is Elohim. As we talked about in part 1, that is actual plural. So God is one God, but manifests himself in 3 persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in fact, at the end of this, Genesis 1:2, it talks about the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. I believe that to be the Holy Spirit. Throughout Genesis, we're going to see many references to the Trinity, to the Son, to the Spirit, and to the Father. And so as we run across those, I'm going to point that out. Also, my belief is that this takes place in 6 literal 24-hour days. There are some that believe in the gap theory, which believes that between that statement and Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, that there is maybe millions or billions of years. Where I believe that falls apart is on a few fronts. First is that when God created things, he created them good. And the second belief I have, that sometimes the most obvious answer, or the easiest answer, can be the correct answer. The gap theory only came into being in the 1800s, and it was a Christian theologian that had to try to counteract the so-called evolutionists, Darwin, and the theory of the long earth. So that was backed in as a possibility to defend Christianity, that if the earth was old. As we're reading through Genesis, we find that Genesis, God creates Adam and Eve, but not as babies, as full-grown adults. When he creates the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, on day 5, we'll find out that they're birds of the air. They're already flying. So if you ever want to know the answer, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It was actually the chicken, according to the Genesis account. So God creates things in beings in their full glory. As much as we love babies, a human being, in this case Adam and Eve, were in their full glory probably at about age 20. So it's not unrealistic to think that when God created the earth, first formless and void, and then filled it with the beauty, that he would create rivers running, oceans, full-grown trees, as we see on day 3. So I believe it was in its full glory, not created to be old, but created fully functional and beautiful, as you would see it prior to the flood. Of course, in Genesis 6, we learn about the flood, and things change dramatically from what we see now to what we would have seen then. With regards to Genesis, we talked about Genesis has 1 through 11, 4 events. Genesis 12 through 50 has 4 people. So as we're studying Genesis, 4 events, Genesis 1 through 11. That's the creation, the fall of man, flood, and then nations. 12 through 50, 4 people. That would be Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So we're in event 1 of Genesis, which is the creation. On day 2, this is Genesis 1, 3, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness night. There was evening, and then morning, the first day. So we have to realize the first day started in darkness. If you ever watch Jewish people, they start their first day in the sunset, because it's different for our culture. We think of the day starting in really in the morning, or even so far as midnight. But according to this first day, darkness came first and then light. I think it's important for us to realize that. For instance, when we get to day 7, and that's the Sabbath, that was actually Saturday. As Christians, we celebrate the Sabbath as a Sunday because that's the day Jesus was resurrected. But to study the Bible, it's good to know that night came first and then day. For instance, when we get to the study of the Passover, the 14th day of Nisan, some call it Nisan, we find that they were required to sacrifice the blood of an unblemished lamb painted over the doorpost, and at that night the angel of death would pass over the firstborn. And so that was the 14th day of Nisan, or Nisan. When Jesus was celebrating this Passover feast with his disciples, the 14th day of Nisan, that was that night. But we have to remember the next morning was still the 14th day of Nisan, because the 15th day of Nisan doesn't start until that sundown. So it's important to know that, because Jesus was crucified on the 14th day of Nisan, the very day that the Hebrew people were asked to sacrifice the unblemished lamb to pay and to save themselves from a physical death. It's really a prophecy to what Jesus did on the 14th day of Nisan, thousands of years later, when he allowed himself to be sacrificed. He's the unblemished lamb, and that his blood would be spilled to cover us of our sin on that very day. So to understand the night today, and that sets that forward. We'll also find out that on the 17th day of Nisan, when Jesus rose, the way the nights and the days worked, that if you go back to the Genesis account that we will study, that the ark after the flood landed on the 17th day of the 7th month, which that is Nisan. So the ark actually landed on Mount Ararat on the 17th day, which would later become Easter morning. So it's fun to look for these parallels. The earth was saved physically 5,000 years ago when the ark landed on the 17th day of Nisan. The world was saved spiritually for those of us that choose to follow the Lord Jesus Christ on the 17th day of Nisan, about 2,000 years ago, when Jesus rose from the grave. So anyway, that's just a side note, but it's hard for some of us that are not of the original Jewish faith to understand that the night actually starts the 24-hour period, which is stated there in Genesis 1:5. So we go on to the third day, the second day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between waters to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day. Again, the evening, morning, second day. So as we're studying this, the water from the water, there are two great theories. One is Walt Brown, subsurface water, and then our surface water. And it's a great theory with regards to what will come up with the flood, and we'll discuss that again. Then there's another theory that Dr. Henry Morris, actually civil engineer like myself, came up with. He actually wrote some of the hydraulic textbooks we took when I went to ASU. And he has this canopy of water theory where, because the earth was on its axis, there was a canopy of water that separated us from the atmosphere, and that would filter out everything from radiation, causing you to not age as quick, constant temperature. So I'm not going to state which theory I believe. They're just both great theories, and those are two with regards to separating the water from the water. Next we have Genesis 1:9. Now we're moving to the third day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear." And so God called the dry ground land, and gathered waters that he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, bearing seed, and plants and trees on the land, and bear fruit with seed in it, according to its various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit and seed according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and then morning, the third day. Again, setting the precedent, evening first, and morning. And also the plants were created the third day, in their full glory, like we talked about, already producing fruit. And the seed is important because when God creates things, he creates species. And there's no crossover species. So there's no such thing as evolution. There's microevolution, but not macroevolution. You can have a few dogs, and 100 years later, you have 5,000 different kinds of dogs. You can have hybrids of tomatoes and different plant families, but the seed follows its own kind. This is the same with animal species. And humans, of course, only humans produce humans. We're created in God's image. But God created an order to things, and for all the evolutionists, they've had 160 to 170 years to find any kind of a crossover species, and never have done so. So with regards to that, there is no fossil records of any animal that bridges the gap from another animal. God created it so that every animal follows its own kind. Also, an interesting note here is on the third day, God created plants. And I find that interesting because on the fourth day, we're going to find out soon, he creates the sun, moon, and stars. So where was the light? I think God was the light in day one and day two. However, now the fourth day will have the sun. And I point that out because for those that believe each day is millions of years, I don't think those plants would have lasted very long without the sun for millions of years. And then day 5, when the fish of the sea and the birds of the air come along, their oxygen-breathing carbon dioxide is what they exhale, which is what plants need. So for a symbiotic relationship, photosynthesis the next day, animals with regards to fish and birds the following day, that works out pretty good for 24-hour days. But when you try to put millions of years in there, it just doesn't work. So I think God knew what he was talking about. He created it, and I really believe that the simple answer is the best answer. Sorry about that. The sun was starting to get in my eyes, and I was slowly moving to the side, and it finally caught up with me. So now we're on Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the great light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God said, let the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, and to govern the day, and to govern the night, and to separate the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, and it was the fourth day. So what we have here is, this is the crazy thing. The earth really is the center of the universe. God created that first. And then, on the fourth day, he chose to create the sun, the moon, and the stars. And as we talked about in the first Genesis part 1, we talked about that Jesus is actually the creator of everything we see. It's in John 1, it's in Colossians 1:15, it's in even Isaiah, the Hebrew canon, in Isaiah 48:12 through 16. So the word God here we've talked about as Elohim, and this is Jesus that is actually creating the entire universe. And so he chooses to create the sun, moon, and stars for us here on earth. And of course, it says the moon gives light, and we all know that it reflects the sun's light, but that's just what it's called. I mean, when you go look at a sunset, the sun isn't really setting, it's an earth rotation. We don't call it an earth rotation, we call it a sunset. So God created, and I should say Jesus created the universe, which is infinite, and stars that are infinite. And so I just think what a great thing for God to show us how infinite he is, to create these stars that go on forever. And so now we've got the sun, the moon, and the stars, and that's day 4. And this is when the earth rotation begins, which creates what we now know is night and day, and one 24-hour day. Again, I believe that the other 3 are 24-hour days because God had an order already planned out. And like I said, if they weren't 24-hour days, these plants would be in trouble because they were now created billions of years ago with no sun or no carbon dioxide. So I think 24 hours is a pretty good number to use. Now we're on day 5, Genesis 1:20. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. So God created creatures of the sea and every living and moving thing in which the water teems according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water and the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. Again, the evening, morning. And also, we find that statement about God created flying birds on day 5. Again, the chicken, not the egg. They were created to eventually procreate and fill the earth, but they were created in their full glory. All the ocean-dwelling creatures, water creatures, and all the sky creatures. Now we move to day 6. This is the day of man. And so in Genesis 1:24, and God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, wild animals, all according to their kind. God made the wild animals according to their kind, the livestock according to their kind, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kind. God saw that it was good. And then he said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the livestock, over the earth, and over the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In his image God created him. Male and female he created. This is, as I mentioned before, my life first, that last part, because we are created in his image. So profound, it's really undescribable of what we are in God's sight, his greatest creation. Never in Scripture do I find that even angels were created in God's image. So, as I mentioned before, if we could treat our fellow human beings as image bearers of God, I think we'd be a lot better off. And that is really the great commandment, to love others. There's no tangible way we can really love God. So when we say love God and love others, it really comes down to loving others, because that's how you love God. Love is an action, it's a verb, and it's just not a warm feeling towards God. It's actually getting out and doing things for his image bearers. So when we love other people, we're loving the image of God and loving God himself in a tangible way. Now again, it's reiterated that these animals that were created, everything on the actual dry ground, when it procreates, it bears its own. So there's no cross species, there's no mutations. Again, this is against anything that evolution teaches, where one day there's a one-celled animal, and billions of years, here we are. Also, on a scientific note, the second law of thermodynamics, which was presented, and it actually is called the law, by the way, it's the fact that things eventually go from order to disorder. Sir Isaac Newton came up with the second law of thermodynamics. So a simple way of saying that is, if I had a watch and shook it around in a box for 1,000 years, eventually it would just become a bunch of useless parts. It went from order, something useful, to disorder. If I took all the parts of a watch and shook it around for an infinite amount of time, it would never put itself together and create a watch. Things don't go to order, they go to disorder. And that was actually the second law of thermodynamics. And I do believe Sir Isaac Newton was a Christian. He also came up with the whole principle that if you take a hot brick and a cold brick, given enough time, those two bricks, when put together, will become the same temperature. So this created a problem with the evolutionists. They had to come up with the Big Bang Theory, because after Sir Isaac Newton, they had to realize, hey, this all had to start from somewhere. It couldn't just be here for an infinite amount of time. If so, we would all be the same temperature. And that temperature would actually be absolute zero. So it became a big problem, so they had to start with a starting clock also. Ours starts about 6,000 years ago. Theirs might start 4 billion years ago. And by the way, if it was 4 billion years ago, I find it strange to find that we still have a hot magma center to our Earth, over 3,000 degrees, when our constant temperature of the surface of the Earth is about 58 degrees. I think that even common sense would tell you that that hot center of our Earth, 3,000 degrees, wouldn't be around for much longer than 6,000 years. So, that being said, man is created on the sixth day. That's the day of man. We'll finish off this day 6 here. So God created them, he's talking about male and female, to be fruitful and increase in number, and to fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish, the sea, the birds of the air, and every living creature who moves on the ground. Then God said, I will give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath and life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. interesting because it looks like, based on that statement, that we were created to be vegetarians. At this point, death has not entered the world. That's the good part. So we were to rule over, have dominion over all of the creatures on the earth, and instructed to eat all the fruits and vegetables and plants that God had created. And God said that, and God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Good is underplayed. Good is great, awesome, no death. Everything's perfect at this point. And there was evening, and there was morning. That was the sixth day. Now, in 2, as I mentioned before, we're going down to 2:1, but scriptures weren't originally written with numbers. So in the summary statement of the 7 days, we have to keep reading through 2:3 to finish it off. And 2:1 says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work that he had created doing, and on the 7th day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from the work of creating all that he had done." So in these 6 days, he creates everything we see, so complex. I mean, you could take a tree, let's say a Palo Verde tree, study it the rest of your life. You'd never fully understand it. And he can take everything and create everything we see in 6 days. And then he, on the Sabbath, the 7th day, and it's good for us to understand that the Sabbath is truly a Saturday at this point. He took that Saturday and enjoyed his creation and rested. And not that he needed to rest, but he set an example for us so that we work is good. We're created to work. So if you're not enjoying your work, I'd say that there's a chance that we might be working for the wrong things. So work is a good thing. Adam and Eve, when they went into the garden, they had to pick the vegetables and fruit. They didn't just fly into their mouth. God worked as an example. But there's a time to take and enjoy the fruits of your labor and to enjoy life. And that's really an example for us to not continue to work, to take time out and enjoy things. With regards to that enjoyment, in the New Testament, of all the 10 commandments, the 4th commandment, which is keep the Sabbath holy, is never reiterated. I believe that's the one commandment that he gives for us. The first 3 are to worship God. The last 6 are how to treat other people. But the 4th commandment, I really believe, is for us, our benefit, to take and rest and enjoy the work that we have done. There's nothing wrong with that. It was an example set by God. So that's an example for us to take and relax and enjoy the fruits of our labor. So that concludes the summary statement of the first 7 days and how they came into being. And this concludes part 2 of Created to Create study series. Thank you.